Hello and welcome to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Suffolk County Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now, for those of you that are steeped in politics, you'll recognize the name of the young man who's going to be our first guest today. I mean, he's done so much in politics. And for those of you that are not steeped in politics, keep your ears and eyes open for this young man because he's a comer. And that would be Tino Capobianco. Actually, I like to call him Valentino, which is his full name, Tino Capobianco. Tino. Thanks for coming through today.
Sure. Thank you so much for the warm introduction and having me as a guest today. I really appreciate it.
Now, folks, Tino is the chairman of the Winthrop School Committee, but he is also the chief of staff for Senator Paul Feeney. So the question then becomes, when does he have time to eat and sleep? So he's going to tell us all about that now. But let's start with the school committee.
Absolutely.
Now, how long have you been on the school committee?
I'm entering into my fourth year, first term, and I've been the chairman of the school committee for the past 2 years.
So tell us about it. You know, I mean, most people know or have an idea of what they think school committees do. What do you guys do?
Absolutely. The role of the school committee, number one, is the hiring and firing of the superintendent, and it's the administrators who oversee the day-to-day process of the schools. It's kind of like what you do in the sheriff's office, I would guess. But we work with the budget, work within our budget to make sure that our students have the best education possible. But what I like to do from my own approach is work with our school resource officers, work with leaders in the community to make sure that the students in Winthrop have the best education possible and the best experience and safe experience growing up in Winthrop possible.
So what do you have? One elementary, one middle, one high school? How many schools do you have?
We have two elementary schools. We have an elementary school with pre-K going up to the second grade, another elementary school, 3rd through 5th, and we have a brand new middle high school, which is 6th grade through 12th grade.
Brand new?
Brand new. We're in our 3rd year, and it's a state-of-the-art facility.
I was just about to ask, so it has all the bells and whistles?
All the bells and whistles, brand new $11 million athletic facility. It's just an amazing facility.
Now, are the kids living on iPads and that sort of thing now? Unlike when we went to school when it was basically books and pads and pencils.
Yep, students are living on Chromebooks and the teachers are working on smartboards now, not chalkboards. So.
Now, what's the makeup of the Winthrop school committee, the teachers there? Do you have more men than women, more white than black? How does that break out?
I'd say the makeup is it used to be a lot of older crowd. Right now, it's a lot of younger students, a lot of younger teachers, a lot of teachers right out of college. And the folks that are teaching are actually a lot of kids that grew up in Winthrop that want to give back. They graduate school, graduate to the high school, graduate to the town, and want to give back to the community and want to stay in Winthrop.
So why was it important for you to go after that position? Not the chairmanship position, but just to be on the school committee.
It was at a time where I grew up, a lot of teachers, you stayed in Winthrop because it was the hometown discount. You wanted to give back, and I thought that was unfair. I said our teachers deserve to be paid more, and one of my proudest accomplishments is working with the union to make sure the last 4 years they received a 6% increase in salary.
Wow.
Yeah, and teacher retention has been a major priority. Me. And that's something we're working. Still need a lot to do, but that's something we're working on.
So now, did you have to fight the State House a lot to get that pay increase, or did that just come from Winthrop itself?
No, I'd say that's been a lot of positive working with our town council to make sure they provided funding beyond Chapter 70, which brings to the next point. Hopefully, with the Promise Act, the Cherish Act, we could reshape the Chapter 70 formula, something that hasn't been touched since 1993, which would definitely benefit local school districts.
For those who don't know, what is Chapter 70?
So Chapter 70 is a formula that the state created as part of the Education Reform Act of 1993 that basically allocates state funding for local school districts.
Do you guys have charter schools in Winthrop?
We do not have charter schools in Winthrop. However, Excel Academy is in East Boston locally.
So what's your thoughts on charter versus public? I mean, I grew up as a public school kid, but I also like some of the things that charter schools do, the longer school day and some of the other things that they have there. What's your thoughts?
Look, I'm a public school advocate, but there's a time and place for charter schools. Excel Academy in East Boston does a great job, and I'm all for that. But I don't think they should take away from public education, and I don't think that there should be for-profit charter schools.
So, you know, one of the things that gives me pause, particularly in tough budgetary times, schools will eliminate certain courses that I think are just so important to develop the whole child. And that would be physical education, that would be the arts, and that would be civics. Civics is that class that teaches people how community and government works together. Does your high school have those three, or have you talked about those coming back if they don't have them?
We do have those three, and I actually attended a civics class as a guest speaker. We actually have a course that's really interesting. It's called the Viking Longships Program. Our team mascot is the Winthrop Vikings. So they learn about history of Vikings. And it's a class that it really prepares you for college. You have to write an essay to enter into it, and you create your own curriculum. It's a really interesting course that only Winthrop has. Yep. Civics, our American government teacher is a woman named Maria Flanagan, extremely experienced, has been there a number of years. And if it wasn't with her, I don't know if I'd be working in government now. I was in her course. Really? And she encouraged me to serve as a delegate for Student Government Day back when I was a
So that's how this all started with you.
And she got me in on it, and before you know it, I was knocking doors for John Kerry in 2004.
No kidding. No
so
kidding.
I have her to thank for that.
Well, you know, and folks, I will say this. When I ran, I believe it was my first term, Tina was out there with me in Winthrop, you know, knocking doors and introducing me to people. You know, the whole civic process, civic engagement, beyond just the school system, is lost on a lot of people.
Absolutely.
You know, do you find more millennials now? Do you find more young folk coming towards or wanting to get involved, engaged with politics, or no?
I think more than ever. I think President Obama was one of the best presidents we've ever had. My generation did a lot to get him elected, but once he was there, I think a lot of people said, this is good and it's how it's always gonna be. When Donald Trump won, everyone said, let's get involved. And we saw that, whether you like her or not, AOC, what she did in winning that race was amazing. And it brought a lot of people to the table and a lot of new candidates to the table. You're seeing that with Ayanna Pressley and her win. We saw that with one of the closest Senate races you'll ever see in Texas. Even though Beto lost that race, that Senate race is going to be a model for 2020.
He's losing steam, though.
He's losing steam in this presidential race, but I think how he conducted that Senate race. You
know, I was before he announced that he was going to run for president, I actually thought that he should run for Senate again.
Absolutely.
Maybe governor. I thought the step up to president, although he's talented and all of that good stuff, I thought that was a step, you know, just a bit too high.
I agree.
I agree with you about the present president, that for a variety of reasons, a lot of people want to re-engage now, you know. And one of my things is, I understand the Democrats saying that they want to go towards that impeachment. I get it. Yeah. The thing about that is, one, the Senate is not going to take it the whole way, number one. At least I don't believe they will. Maybe that might change in the next couple of years. But two, I think that the Democrats would be wiser to utilize that time and treasure to not only cultivate new candidates or existing candidates, frankly, but to get more people to the poll. Absolutely. You know, and so the process to impeach takes so long that even if it went through, his term will be over. You know, and so my thought is, beat him at the ballot box. You know, and use that money and that time to really cultivate others. What's your thoughts on that?
I support impeachment, but as Democrats, I think we all need to be unified and do whatever we can to win this election. Look, there are a lot of good candidates in this race. If Steve Bullock, good candidate, did a lot of good in Montana. If he doesn't come out on top after Iowa, which I don't think he will, I think he should be encouraged to run in Montana for for U.S. Senate. Same goes with Castro or Beto, for that matter. If Stacey Abrams doesn't get in this presidential race, she's a great candidate for Senate in Georgia. I mean, we have a really good field. You know, all the way from our own senator, Congressman Moulton, Vice President Biden, Mayor Pete, you know, and Senator Sanders. The list goes on of the candidates we have. And whoever comes out of this primary, we need to do what we can to make sure they win this election, because the heart of our democracy is really on the line. We have to win.
So I mentioned in the open that you are also the Chief of Staff for Senator Paul Feeney, a really good friend of ours.
Yes.
And just a great guy. Please tell him we send our regards when you see him later. How did that happen? How did you team up with Senator Feeny?
Well, I've known the senator for a long time. If you remember, we served together on the platform committee, and he was running in that special state Senate race, and I was able to volunteer during that time. He had a very close primary, which was a good win for him, and that general was even tighter. After that win, he asked me to come on his staff. I agreed to. And then earlier this year, he named me as Chief of Staff, and I'm honored to serve in that position.
So there again, for those that don't know, what does the Chief of Staff do for a legislator?
Well, I sort of manage the office. In our office, we have a legislative director, a legislative aide, a budget director, and a district director. So I get to represent the senator at meetings and district events. His district is the Bristol-Norfolk district, which is begins in Sharon, goes all the way up through Attleboro and Seacon.
That's a pretty conservative district, isn't it?
It is a purple area.
Yeah.
It is a purple area.
How did a Democrat pull that off? Was that because of you?
No, it's because of him, because he's a great candidate and a great senator. Yeah,
yeah. So what is his main issues? What is he standing on? What is he trying to push through?
I'd say he is, what you see is what you get with Senator Feeny. He is a working class person, comes from a working class union background, was an IBEW member, and the bills that he filed this legislation, filed this past session include the Healthy Workplace Bill and, of course, the pay parity for corrections officers, which I know he's been teaming up with you on.
Talk to us about that, the pay parity, for officers. I mean, the discussion is, you have your Department of Correction officers
Absolutely.
And your county facility officers, and the county guys that, although they do the same job, make a little less money. Is that a tough nut to crack, trying to get pay equity? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I think so. It's going through the committee process right now, and I know that there is a committee hearing on it in the Public Safety Committee in the summer months, and I know that he's teaming up with you, and there's a number of co-sponsors on this bill, so I feel pretty optimistic that it has a chance this legislative session.
So talk to us about the state of politics. First, I want to ask you about it nationally, but locally. Talk to us about what you see happening in the State House. There's been a fair amount of turnover. In the 2018 election, you had a lot of ladies of color,
Absolutely.
Come in. Several incumbents got knocked out of the box, What's happening with our politics in the state? What do you think?
I think that there's definitely a new wave of younger people running for office. But I think you're seeing a lot of folks want to work together and make sure they could work for their district. And I think it's a good place to be right now. A lot of folks really feel that they need to give back to their community.
And so how about the leadership up at the State House? I mean, are they welcoming all of this new, vibrant talent into the fold? Or they're like, hey, kid, wait your turn. This is the way we do things?
I think it's welcoming. I mean, look, as you know, I'm a former staff for Speaker DeLeo. I don't work in the House anymore, but I know that I think very highly of him, and I think he's doing a wonderful job. And as working for a new senator, I know that President Spilka has been extremely welcoming to us, to Senator Feeny and as a staff. And in his reelection, she's been extremely helpful.
Nationally, what do you think of our politics?
Nationally, it's very divisive, and it's as bad as could be. I think that Nancy Pelosi is doing a great job trying to manage the caucus. I think Seth Moulton actually did a good job in challenging and trying to put term limits on her. I think, eventually we will need a new speaker, a younger speaker, and I think that he deserves credit for making that happen.
He caught a lot of guff for that, though.
He got a lot of guff. And it hurt him, but I think something needs to be said. And I supported Speaker Pelosi. I think it's important to have an Italian woman at the table.
Go ahead now, listen to that. Right. And I like Seth, and I think Seth is all of that, and then some. I'm not sure that this was the time for him to run for president.
Absolutely. Yep, I agree with that.
I think that he was doing a good job as a rep. Where he's at now, and I figured he needed a little more seasoning. Before he made that move. So we'll see what happens. I understand that he may have a couple of challenges to the seat that he's presently holding.
Yeah, I mean, Barbara Italian, who just ran for Congress, I heard that she's thinking of running.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's been reported
That's
in
news.
the Globe.
I did not know that. Okay.
John Tierney, former congressman, who Seth actually beat a few years ago.
Yeah, I did hear about that.
Has been rumored, but, I can't see anyone beating Seth in that district right now.
Barbara Italian?
Yeah.
Wow. See, now that's another race that I thought that she shouldn't have gotten into.
Yeah.
I thought that she probably should have stayed where she was. And I know Barbara, and I like her. I think she's, pretty sharp.
And Ed Markey is working like you wouldn't believe. I don't know if you've happened to see his latest palm card.
No.
Brilliant palm card. It's him on the cover with the Green New Deal standing next to Congressman Ocasio-Cortez.
Oh, no kidding.
So he is really fired up about this campaign, and I think it'll be tough to beat.
He's got a challenger.
He does have a challenger, but I look forward to supporting the senator.
So now in 2018, the Democrats were able to get the House back. Can they get the Senate back in 2020?
I think it's possible if we're able to recruit good candidates. if the right people step up to the plate, we definitely can.
The thing that I noticed the difference rather that I noticed between the Democrats and the Republicans, when the Republicans get on message, they all get on message. They all get on message. Yep. The Democrats, big heart, big tent, and so they're chipping away at a lot of different things. I'm not sure that way of doing it serves the party the best. What do you think?
My biggest fear is that after this primary process, we aren't unified as a party. We all need to have a conversation now, see what happens. We could all have our favorite, but after that convention next summer, we need to look at this to take this country back and work together as a party, as brothers and sisters, and make sure that we could be the one party that says to Donald Trump, "You're fired." And whoever comes out as the nominee, make sure that they're in there representing us.
Clearly, I'm somewhat biased in that race because of Senator Warren. I took a leave of absence from my job several years ago before I was sheriff to help her on the 2012 campaign. I think that she's put a lot of good policy issues out there and a lot of policy papers. The question is, particularly after 2016, is it policy or personality that rules the day? What do you think?
It should be policy, but I think with our culture today, it's a little of both. Unfortunately, you saw with Donald Trump, it was all his personality. There was zero. His policy was a wall. I don't know how, but somehow it worked. Yeah. My father says, look, if John Kerry was to explain an immigration policy, it would be a brilliant policy, but it will take 45 minutes. That's someone who's prepared to be president on day one.
Right.
So we need someone that has that mix.
Yeah. I think the senator, it would be fascinating if she could pull it off. My understanding is that she's picking up steam.
Absolutely. I'd love to see her in a debate.
Yeah. The debates actually begin, I think, at the end of this month.
Oh, I'm in a debate against Donald Trump.
Oh, debate against Donald Trump.
Man.
That would be, that would be very interesting. That would be very interesting because, first of all, she's no shrinking violet, and she will give it as good as she gets it. And that would be good, And it would be funny because I saw a clip recently where the Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump debate, and Donald was kind of hovering around her and then standing behind her, I think the senator would turn around and say, dude, you're in my space here, man. And Hillary didn't do that, but hey, it is what it is. I'm very concerned about the nation's politics.
Absolutely.
I'm very concerned about how our allies are looking at us right now. And I'm concerned about the fact that although the economy appears to be pretty good, there's still a lot of people out of work.
Absolutely.
And a lot of homeless people. Do you and the Senator Feeny, talk about those types of issues, those bread and butter issues about housing, healthcare, education for people's kids?
Absolutely. I mean, those are the bread and butter issues that the senator campaigned on and talks about. I mean, that's why he's a senator. That's his background is the bread and butter issues.
Mm-hmm. Is he up this year?
He's 2020, two-year term.
So not this, so not 2019.
2020.
Now, when do you start gearing up for that? Because the kind of thing that people will hear is, okay, for a 2-year term, you work for 1 year and then you're campaigning for the next year. Is that the reality, or how does that work?
I would say you always legislate, and that transfers into action, into campaigning.
So he hasn't begun campaigning just yet?
Not formally.
Okay. Do you guys think you'll have a taker, someone coming at?
It's a competitive district, so
is it really?
Who knows? Yes.
Now the guy that he beat in the special, he had to run again in the general, I think. Yep. Did the same guy run against him?
It was the same person who came back. A year,
so he beat him twice.
Beat him twice.
And who was that? Had that person been in office, or was this someone who was outside?
No, he was actually a legislative aide for a Republican state rep in that area.
How'd that seat open up?
Jim Timilty, who was a state senator, resigned.
Oh, that's right. He moved on. He moved to the
county treasurer.
Yeah. It's interesting. Is he in Norfolk? I'm not
Norfolk
sure.
County. Yep.
He is, and it's interesting because the sheriff in Norfolk, Mike Bellotti, has stepped away, and he's now the president over at Quincy College. Go, Mike.
Yeah.
And they've got Jerry McDermott in there. Good guy.
Absolutely.
Came from outside of corrections, but he's actually surrounded himself with some quality people, some Republicans, but also a Democrat or two, that have been in the kind of corrections sphere for quite some time. And so I think he'll get his legs up underneath him.
Absolutely.
One of the things that clearly appeals to us is public safety.
Yep.
Now,
absolutely.
has the senator talked about public safety and what that means? And let me preface that, but let me say this to you. So there were a couple of reports that came out that said since the number of people that are going to jail is going down, that the money that the sheriffs get should go down kind of in an equal fashion. And what we say is, although the count may be going down or the number of bodies that we have, the people that are with us have mental health problems and opiate addiction or addiction problems. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I think 70% of my population there self-reports that they're involved with some sort of, substance abuse. I'm just curious from a legislative standpoint, can the legislators bring something forth that could really help these people? I know they had the criminal justice bill last year.
Yeah.
I think that went a long way. To me, the Achilles heel of that is they didn't put enough money in for aftercare.
Absolutely.
I think they need to do more of that. But is this something that's kind of front burner up there?
I have to be honest with you, I haven't had that conversation with him, but...
well, just in the building.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think that, and I've heard you use this line, the sheriff's office, you're in the business of going out of business. The folks that are incarcerated are in there, a lot of them are minor drug offenses that are in there to be rehabbed, and they need to have a 72-hour plan when they get out to know what they're doing, to have a job lined up, to be back into society.
That's pretty good. You're right.
Yeah.
And 2 to 3 days out of the facility, you could be in a world of hurt if you don't have some of the creature comforts, housing and healthcare and a job, lined up. And so you're right on that point. I am glad, particularly because I'm in public safety, I guess, but I'm glad that a lot of people are talking about public safety.
Absolutely.
It's on the lips of a lot of people, and they're really concerned with how their communities and how their families are going to be safeguarded.
Absolutely.
You see? And so I think that's a good thing. What committees do you know the committees?
Yeah,
that
he is the chairman of the Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure Committee.
Okay.
And I'll say this in terms of public safety. Last year during the budget, he made his maiden speech by securing over $450,000 for bulk gear extractors for firefighters.
Really?
Yep.
Okay.
And he was able to work on that same issue again in this year's budget.
For firefighters?
For firefighters.
Wow.
Not that same value, but that's sort of been a priority for him.
Right. Well, please tell him we send the message that we need him to fight on behalf of the sheriffs and the officers. Well, he's already fighting on behalf of the officers there, which was really great. We had this big rally a couple of weeks ago, as was mentioned earlier, and it was really good to see this senator out there. There were a couple of legislators out there. There were a couple of sheriffs there. But equally, if not more important, was the number of officers that came out.
I believe Senator Timilty and Representative Hawkins.
That's right.
There.
That's right. So, and it was good to see both of those guys out there. It would have been nice to have more. It'd have been nice to have more sheriffs, but we actually had a sheriff's meeting that was running simultaneous to that. But to the MSA meeting, the reason I was there is I'd given my word to the officers well before that meeting with the MSA was scheduled. And I figured, you know what? You gave your word. If you can back it up, you should go back it up. And it's not something that I was sorry about. And then I, actually left a little bit earlier and still got down to the meeting. So that worked out pretty well, So, the politics, the political kind of world that we're in right now, and you've been in this game a long time, has changed so radically. What do you think has brought about that change where people just seem to not have the same kind of respect for one another that they used to? What's polluted the system?
Every time you turn on the news, you just get sad, and you see the way that both sides talk to each other, and you see, like, I've done advance for a lot of campaigns and presidential events. When you see a 23-year-old kid overseas having a cover-up, the name of a ship is after Senator John McCain, and for Mick Mulvaney to say that that's acceptable, there's just something wrong there. Yeah. John McCain is a war hero. I didn't vote for him, but I respect him. He's a war hero. We can't, that is unacceptable for an advanced staffer to do that and then for it to be okay. That's fireable, in my opinion.
There's a lot of shenanigans going on within the Trump administration that shouldn't be. Now, look, there are a lot of people that like Donald Trump.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, and he's got, you know, a serious base, about 30%, 35%. Really? But the thing here is that, one, they will stick through, it appears they will stick with him through thick and thin. But if you've noticed, since he's really been playing this tariffs game, you know, that we're taking a hit in this country.
Absolutely.
You know, can he sustain that?
The economy is good now, as you said earlier. A lot of that's because of what President Obama has done. He saved the auto industry. Okay, we don't know what these tax cuts are going to do. We don't know what's going to happen with these tariffs. That's what my fear is.
Yeah, that's what my fear is also.
Yeah.
And it's actually, it's a tax on the American citizen.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's a tax on a lot of the people that supported Donald Trump. But it doesn't seem to me that these people are going to walk away from Donald Trump. You know, I mean, he's basically remade the Republican Party in his own image.
It's not the Republican Party anymore.
No, it's not. You know, and that fiscal conservatism, you know, I mean, it's out the window.
I'm really curious if there's going to be one courageous Republican in 2020 that says, I'm with the Democratic nominee. Will it be a John Kasich or a Mitt Romney or someone we can't even think of?
That's interesting.
Because I think if that happened with Hillary, she might have won.
But do you think that if that happened this time around, that others would follow?
I think it's definitely possible.
You think?
I think it could happen.
Okay.
Under the right circumstance.
Yeah, yeah. We don't have a heck of a lot of time left, so tell us about how we as a people can wrap our arms around each other, mostly either in a civically engaged or political framework, so that we can find our way back to where we were. You know, Donald Trump is great for saying that make America great again. I tweak that a little bit and I say make America sane again.
Absolutely.
Because it seems like the country is kind of going off the rails, and it frankly is scary. What is it going to take to pull us back together?
So I spoke to a group of students at class night the other night, and I got to say the students in Winthrop received over $250,000 in local scholarships, which is amazing. And,
that is.
And I was just thinking what these kids done over the past few years, and they were volunteers with our WinArc students, our veterans, and I said, you know, you guys are wise enough to understand that it's okay to love who you love. You respect those who are from other countries. We have international students, and you volunteer with different organizations. Just as you move on with life, or you go into the workforce or your union job, remain engaged, continue to volunteer, just give back, you know. And if it doesn't work your way, don't go on Twitter and start fights. Don't agonize. Get better.
Yeah, man, that's what I told these kids. That's some good, powerful words, you know, that we should all heed. So listen, you know, we're out of time. I want to thank you for coming through today. You know, it's always a pleasure. You know, you're one of my best dudes.
Sure,
man.
Thanks so much. We've been good since day one.
Oh, no doubt, man. It's always good talking to you.
Absolutely.
Know? So, all right, folks, we're going to go to a break, and on the other side, we're going to have Rahsaan Hall from the ACLU sit at this table and answer some pretty tough questions. So please do stay tuned.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
Oh, Vanessa. You gonna text her back?
Nope. I'm high. I'm gonna hit the treadmill.
You're already making good decisions when you're high.
We need to go meet the guys. I'm lit. Can you drive?
Nope. I'm high. How about they come over?
Where?
Don't make an exception when it comes to driving. If you feel different, you drive different.
Welcome back to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Suffolk County Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now, on this side of the break, we have a practitioner that is just renowned for getting the good work that people need to get done. And that would be Mr. Rahsaan Hall, who's over at the ACLU, and he's going to talk to us about some of the initiatives, some of the programs, some of the things that they're really looking at to make this dare I say, state, dare I say, this nation better and actually more equitable for people across the board. Rahsaan, thank you so much for coming on today, brother.
How are you?
Really appreciate it. Good. Listen, man, you don't want to know. We ain't got enough time to tell you how tired I am. But you know that game, man. You know that game.
Yeah.
So before we get deep into the into what you're doing these days with the ACLU, talk to us about the program that you had for the DAs back during the 2018 race. You know.
Absolutely. We knew that criminal law reform kept coming up against hurdles. Year after year, we were trying to get the legislature to change some of the laws. And we consistently met this roadblock, which was the district attorneys, because they would go to the legislature and oppose criminal law reforms that were the legislature was trying to implement and that advocates were trying to implement. But even beyond that, when we think about mass incarceration or over-incarceration and the gross racial disparities that exist within this system, the district attorneys are one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful players in the system. They serve as the gatekeeper. They decide which cases are going to get prosecuted, what type of recommendations to set for bail, what type of sentences to recommend to the court, what type of information gets turned over to the accused when they are facing charges. And so having that much power and influence was something we felt the public needed to know about. And with the year coming up, with the elections coming up, we've launched this campaign to provide information about what district attorneys do, what their role is, responsibilities, and the power that they have. And what we found out was that more and more people, when confronted with the information about what DAs do, would pay attention and vote. And so there were 5 contested races last year throughout the state. The last time there were that many contested races was like 36 years ago at the height of the war on drugs. But now when people are talking about wanting a more just and transformative criminal legal system, you see these candidates running on progressive platforms. And here in Suffolk County, Rachel Rollins won, who ran on a campaign of progressive reform. Out in Berkshire County, Andrea Harrington won. I just met her. Yeah, and then even in Middlesex County, where Marion Ryan, who was the DA before, was seen as one of the most progressives, she had a challenger that pushed her further to the left. And so we felt like our campaign was a huge success in raising the level of awareness. We saw a significant increase in ballots cast for DA races, in some instances even 126% more people casting ballots for DA because they realized how much it mattered.
So you referenced our new DA here in Suffolk County, Rachel Rollins. Now, we're all familiar with her list of 15 offenses that she said she would not prosecute. Where do you guys come down on that? You know?
Yeah, I mean, we think it's a good thing. To be clear, her policy is not a strict decline to prosecute policy, but it is a presumptive non-prosecution of certain offenses. And the ACLU, we did an analysis of those 15 charges, looking at data from 2013 to 2014 from her predecessor, Dan Conley. And what we found is what she's proposing isn't dramatically different from what was already happening. Like 60% of those charges were being dismissed anyway. But what we also found, which we suspected and shouldn't be a surprise to your viewers, is that black people were disproportionately charged with these low-level offenses, motor vehicle offenses, trespassing offenses, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct. The one place where there was consistency was in drug possession, but then there was a huge inconsistency in drug distribution charges, or not distribution, but possession with intent to distribute. And that's just merely possessing some drugs that the police believe you are intending to sell. And so with that level of discretion, police can decide, oh, they're just possessing it for their own use, or they're possessing it and they're intending to sell it.
Well, let me ask you this. If the 2013-2014 data bared out the fact that 60% of those cases were being dismissed, why was there such a furor when she came out with this? Was it just the rollout, the way it was rolled out? Had it not been adequately kind of presented to the communities and that sort of thing? I mean, if these cases aren't being prosecuted anyway.
Right. I think there is a narrative that exists out there around the role of prosecutor that's rooted in this misguided notion of public safety, which is that in order to keep the community and the public safe, we need to lock people up. There are dangerous and bad people out there, and the minute we stop locking them up and putting them in cages, then society falls apart. And the reality is that that's just not true, that a lot of the people who are charged with these offenses should not be prosecuted for those offenses. They suffer from mental health issues, substance use disorder, they're living in poverty, they're living with trauma, and data shows that people who are diverted out of the system have much better outcomes. And so using the resources of the Commonwealth, whether it's from arresting to prosecution to detaining people, is a waste of resources, and it could be better spent on the front end, giving people treatment and services. And then the other thing is that being involved in this system, even if people don't go to jail, has a tremendously disruptive impact on people's lives. Going back and forth to court, having an open record, that impacts your ability, or a person's ability, to get a job, to get into school, to navigate life in a relatively free way.
Well, let me ask you this, because prior to a lot of this discussion, prior to me getting into public safety, I thought that the judges really had more jurisdiction over who goes to jail and how long they go to jail for. You're saying that the DAs wield a mighty stick. How did they get that away from the judges, or was it always that way?
Well, it's always been that way, right? When it comes to charging decisions, even though police make the arrest, it's the DA who decides whether or not they're going to prosecute a certain offense. It's the DA who can seek sentencing enhancements. It's the DA, as of the last 20 to 30 years, who have the power of mandatory minimum sentences that they can use to leverage guilty pleas that takes all of the discretion out of the hands of judges. And so you're right, the judges can decide how much bail a person is held on. But if the DA never requests a bail, it's very unlikely that a judge will set bail. The judge is the one who makes the sentencing decision, but it's the DA who requests a sentence, and the judge will decide between what the prosecutor is asking for and what the defense attorney is asking for. But if the prosecutor is never moving forward on that charge to begin with, or making that recommendation to begin with, the judge very well may not pursue or impose the sentence that's being requested.
In a very simplistic way, can you explain to the audience what exactly is mandatory minimum sentences?
So a mandatory minimum sentence is a sentence that is imposed that a sentence of incarceration, where a person is sentenced to a certain period of time, and for that period of time, they cannot be released on probation or parole. They can't get work release. They can't get a furlough. They can't get credit for good time. So if somebody is sentenced to a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence, they're serving every day of that 5 years. And so that impacts people's incentive to be involved in programs, because if getting your GED, getting drug treatment, getting counseling is going to help earn you time so that you can get out earlier, then you're going to take advantage of those. But if it doesn't matter if you do those things, because you're still going to have to serve the 5 years, some people are just dealing with the trauma and we're going to say, forget it, I'll just deal with it myself.
I thought the recent criminal justice bill, though, addressed the good time situation. And
It did.
They're now allowing people, we call them mandos, a mandatory minimum sentence, to now have good time for programming. Is that the case?
For some things, there are credit that is applied for good time for programming.
Okay.
But the overwhelming majority of the mandatory minimums that still exist on the book are still very lengthy sentences. And when we think about 95% of the people who are incarcerated are ultimately coming home one day, we have to ask ourselves as a society, who is it that we want returning to our communities? The people who have been incentivized to take advantage of these opportunities with education, treatment, counseling, or the people who have just been sitting doing dead time.
So what's the upside for a person taking, if I'm in the system or heading towards the system, what's in it for me to take a mandatory minimum sentence just versus whatever?
Yeah, there is no upside. I mean, if a person, for the prosecutor, that gives them all the power.
Right.
But for the person who is accused, they're not going to want to do that. But there's no opportunity to work around that unless the prosecutor makes an offer where they'll say, I will dismiss the mandatory minimum sentence enhancement if you agree to this other sentence that I give you that doesn't carry the mandatory minimum. And so what I used to do, I was a former prosecutor for 8 years here in Suffolk County. They would have a case where somebody was charged with distribution of drugs, and it was a 2-year mandatory minimum sentence. What I said was I would dismiss the mandatory minimum portion if they pled to 1 year in jail. And what that did was it incentivized them taking that 1 year, which wouldn't be a mandatory minimum sentence. They could do the 1 year but get parole or early release or credit for good time, but it guaranteed that I got the conviction. And sometimes folks will say, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing because they didn't get the full mandatory minimum and they're being held accountable. The problem is there are too many people that are being funneled through this system, that incarceration is not always the tool to address some of the behavior and issues that people are dealing with, but that also it takes the power out of the judge's hand, who could really decide what is a fair case. But then it also is an unfair advantage against the individual who may not be guilty of those offenses, but because they don't want to run the risk of facing a lengthy mandatory minimum sentence, will plead guilty to the offer that's less than what the mandatory minimum sentence would be.
So real quick, 2 things on that. I've had some conversations with some DAs that will actually tell you they're not using this as leverage when they really are. Am I?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there was some data that showed in 2015, I think, that 79% of the school zone charges, which is the mandatory minimum enhancement for people who are selling drugs near a school or within a certain distance of a school, or have drugs with the intent to distribute them within that distance to a school. 79% of those school zone charges were dismissed. And so what that means is that prosecutors were dismissing those charges in exchange for a guilty plea. And so if that's not using it for leverage, I don't know what is.
You know, there was one of the DAs in the Commonwealth, actually he had an op-ed, I think last week or a week before, that went after one of his colleagues about certain things, you know, and it was disconcerting for me to read that article, first of all, because, I mean, you know, you guys and ladies are doing the same thing, to go after one of your own that publicly, I thought was out of line. And if you want to have that conversation with your colleague, have that conversation, but to blow it out like that, I just thought that was off the mark. I mean, what's your thoughts on, I mean, did that make sense to you?
I mean, it made sense to me in that I understand this society, and that whenever a black woman in a position of power speaks out and initiates programming and policy in furtherance of the needs of her community, that there's going to be a backlash. The first salvo was from the Secretary of the Executive Office of Public Safety, who sent this public letter chastising DA Rawlins for her decision to not prosecute certain offenses. And then the second one was DA O'Keefe from the Cape and Islands, who similarly issued an op-ed criticizing DA Rawlins. And this letter was filled with racist tropes and fear-mongering about what is best for communities, and that the reason that there are racial disparities within the system are because of the breakdown in the family and the failure for people to recognize the prominence of the church and culture. I mean, like, that's straight out the racist playbook, and that's what he wants to promote, you know, and I think it's highly problematic because it's not rooted in fact. There's no empirical data or evidence that supports the position that he has, and even though there is ample evidence to show that as we've implemented more criminal law reforms, the crime rates have continued to decline and the incarcerated population has continued to decline, he'd rather stay positioned in this place of saying we need to take the hostile and aggressive approaches to community disruption, and completely absolved himself or other DAs of contributing to any of the racial disparities. And his county, Barnstable County, is one of the counties within the Cape and Islands district, has some of the worst racial disparities when it comes to bail and the people who are held on bail. But it doesn't surprise me, because DA O'Keefe is the same person who said that the reason other countries have low incarceration rates is because they use draconian methods like chopping off people's hands to keep the crime rates low. Which is just ridiculous. Yes, he said that in another op-ed or a public. So, you know, so like this is the mentality of the person that we're dealing with.
You know, I actually had an opportunity a year ago to go over to Europe to look at some correction systems over there. And what I found is a system that's actually more rehabilitative.
Right.
And less punitive than we are here in this country, you know, and some of the stuff like in Germany, in their rooms, the inmates don't have windows, so you can't look in, you can't see in. But that was actually written, this privacy clause was written into their constitution after the Holocaust. Now, that's something that we'd never do here.
Sure.
You know, I got to know what a guy or lady's doing in there.
Exactly.
You know, there are no cameras for the same reason because of that's something that we also wouldn't do here. But there was more sensitivity to programming, and there were actually shorter sentences. In fact, when we were there, we went to a trial, we were just there for a little bit, where a young man had unfortunately killed his grandmother, but he only got 7 years. And when asked why just 7 years, we were told, what good will it do to keep this guy in jail for 50 years? You know, and this was a young man. I think he was like 19 or 20. And they were like, you know, first, it's going to be a big cost to the taxpayers. Secondly, we all know that the brain is not fully developed until you're 25. That doesn't make crime or murder acceptable. But what they were saying is, this guy is going to grow up and grow out of some of this activity, hopefully, unless he's got like an underlying mental health issue. And so, therefore, they look at rehabilitating and getting people back home versus keeping them in jail. And that's, I think, in this country, we'll never go there.
Yeah, I mean, but I would say never, right? You know, I align myself with the advocacy and the viewpoint of prison abolitionists. I consider myself one. And, you know, prison abolition for me isn't saying, let's close all the prisons and jails today and let everybody out. But it's talking about a world and casting a vision of a world that we want to live in that does not require caging people for the things that are a manifestation of the intolerable conditions that they are living in. And just like you saw with that young man who was living in Germany who only got 7 years, it was the punishment was geared towards accountability and not just strictly punishment, because there is a belief in the redemptive value of humanity, that if we invest in people, that they are better to live in society with the rest of us, separate and apart from the costs and the trauma and the harm. But like, let's invest in people and not prisons.
So at the ACLU here in the Commonwealth, you are the director of the Racial Justice Program. Tell us what that's all about. What is that set up to do? Sure.
So it's looking at all of the advocacy work that the ACLU is involved in and ensuring that we are focusing on communities of color, historically oppressed and marginalized community, in the way that we talk about the work, the way that we identify the approaches and strategies to do our advocacy, but then also trying to identify the work that is consistent with the ACLU mission, but we might not be engaging in. And so a lot of that has centered around criminal law reform and policing practices. The DA campaign was a major component of that as well. And so we'll continue to evolve and grow out the program and do this racial justice work to lift up the concerns and experience of communities of color.
In that framework, where does the facial surveillance technology come down? What do you guys think about the utilization of that?
Yeah, absolutely. My good colleague, Cade Crockford, who's the director of our Technology for Liberty program, is doing a lot of advocacy on creating a moratorium on the use of face surveillance technology. I think a lot of people are familiar with the technologies that are used that can identify someone's face, but the problem is that there are huge racial disparities. There are privacy and due process concerns. So there's been some legislation that has been introduced to press pause and make sure that the state, before any governmental or state agency uses face surveillance technology, that the state has established some standards, civil rights standards, privacy standards, due process standards. Because if law enforcement can use that technology, and it's been proven to disproportionately misidentify darker-skinned people and women, and there's tons of empirical research and data out there on that. If you're thinking about law enforcement using that, that's highly problematic. If there is a governmental agency that is responsible for identifying custodial parents or safe places, kinship ties for the placement of a child, and the use of facial surveillance technology is used and someone is misidentified, that's highly problematic. So let's establish some standards before governmental agencies start using this technology.
Let me ask you about Black Lives Matter, and from this standpoint. So I understand why it came about, particularly with the killing by police officers and some others probably, of black and brown men. okay? And so as much as I champion their cause and their messaging, I think, and you tell me what you think, that poverty, unemployment, homelessness, really all these other factors play in. And so when you're talking about Black Lives Matter, should we not talk about the bigger macro picture, or should they just focus on the killing of Black and brown men?
Well, I think, as you pointed out, that's how it started out.
Right.
But the advocacy platform has expanded, and so if you look at the movement for Black Lives, it is a more robust approach to addressing the conditions in Black communities that are, that contribute to the suffering and oppression that people are experiencing. So looking at educational opportunities and what's happening in our schools, in addition to law enforcement, in addition to environmental concerns. And so they're taking an intersectional approach to which Black lives matter, right? It's not just about Black men or cisgendered straight Black men, right? It's about everyone, including trans women and people who are immigrants who are Black, right? All of these issues intersect in the lives of Black people and the lives of Black community, and they've developed platforms to address this. And the advocacy, it always starts in one place, but rolls out and becomes a more robust platform. And hopefully it's something that more people look at and engage with to really address the conditions that exist in Black communities.
Several years ago, the legislators in the Commonwealth raised the age of youthful offenders to not have 17-year-olds in an adult correctional facility. And they moved that up to 18. And there are some that would like to see that moved up 19, 20, 21. What do you think about this movement to keep youthful offenders in the Department of Youth Services arena versus putting them into an adult correctional facility?
It's absolutely appropriate. You've mentioned, like when you all were in Germany, you saw the trial of this young man who was prosecuted for killing his grandmother when he was 19 years old. And part of the logic behind only giving him a 7-year sentence was an understanding about the adolescent brain development. And so that's something that we need to take into consideration, that whatever type of punishment we are imposing or whatever type of accountability we are trying to engender, it has to be developmentally appropriate. And so it should be in a setting where they're not going to be subjected to further trauma, where it's going to be a setting that is developmentally appropriate, and it has a restorative approach as opposed to a retributive approach. And so the ACLU is in favor of raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction to make sure that young people are being treated like young people, that they're being met where they are. And this doesn't excuse their behavior. It doesn't give them a complete pass. There's a level of punishment and accountability that's happening, but it is age appropriate.
Would you folks at the ACLU want to see it go all the way up to 21, or
Yes.
you would want to see it go up to 21? Okay. And what about the argument that now you have a 21-year-old in the same facility with a 15-year-old?
There's ways to work around how you segregate people within the population so that they're not, because that is a legitimate concern. Within that age range, there are developmentally appropriate settings for younger people as well. Right. And so it's not housing everyone together. It's putting them in the appropriate place.
Where do you folks come down on the opiate scourge? Or do you? Do you address that and talk about that?
Yeah, we do. We're actually engaged in a campaign called Just Treatment that's really looking at giving people the treatment that they need, recognizing, particularly as it relates to the opioid crisis, that substance use disorder and opioid use disorder is a public health crisis, and that for people who are struggling with these disorders, that the appropriate remedy does not need to be incarceration. And so if someone is on probation and a condition of their probation is that they stay clean, that's kind of silly if we think about it in its public health sense, because that would be like saying to a diabetic, you're going to be punished if your blood sugar drops, right? Now, for some people, there is a debate around whether or not people can control their addiction and manage it. But we also recognize that when people have medication addiction treatment, that disrupting that by incarcerating them has deleterious effects as well. And so part of what we've been doing is litigating to ensure that the facilities that people are incarcerated in continue the treatment that people are getting, but then also making sure that there is legislation so that if someone violates a condition of their probation, that the remedy is not incarceration, so that they can continue to receive the treatment that they're doing. But it's very important to change the narrative about substance use. It's unfortunate that it's just now becoming a popular conversation, because when opioid use and the crack epidemic was ravaging the Black community and the Latinx communities, the solution was more enforcement and more crime, more punishment. And so hopefully the approach now that is impacting white communities also shares the similar benefit in communities of color.
Where does the ACLU come down on safe injection sites?
We're in support of safe injection facilities. We believe that it's appropriate to take that the use, and you can see right outside of your facility.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
if there is no better case for safe injection facilities, just look at the Mass Ave connector, because it creates the opportunity to monitor people's use. It creates an opportunity to provide education, treatment, counseling to people who are struggling with substance use disorder, because it's a harm reduction approach. People are going to use. Prohibition does not work. We've seen it time and time again. So let's reduce the harm and try to get better outcomes for people.
You know, in that argument, I've heard people say, so why should the taxpayers pay for safe injection sites where people can go and basically get high without any sort of negative outcomes on that? And the thing that always, you know, strikes me is, well, if the taxpayers are paying for that, is that not better than the taxpayers paying $55,000 to $65,000 annually per head for an individual to be in jail?
Exactly.
I mean, it just seems to make, to me, common sense that you would want to try to get in front of the curve.
Exactly.
You know, instead of paying all that money behind the curve. Actually, I feel the same way about education.
I was just about to say the same thing with education, right? Where the median amount in the state is $20,000 per student, but we're going to spend $56,000 to $60,000 to incarcerate someone. Like, make the investment on the front end. Make the investment in harm reduction approaches to these issues, and we'll see further reductions in the people that we need to incarcerate.
Do you, and I'm shifting a little bit here, does the ACLU take a stand on what's happening across the country as it pertains to abortions and getting rid of or not allowing abortion facilities to remain open?
Yeah, we're very active in opposing these abortion bans across the country. We're involved in litigation in some of the states where these states have implemented abortion bans. And here in Massachusetts, we're advocating on behalf of legislation to preserve the abortion rights access that we have, the Roe Act that's been introduced. And so we're in a coalition with Planned Parenthood and NARAL to ensure that people have access to reproductive health care, including abortion.
I've got about 60 seconds left, and I want to ask you about the whole discussion around gun control, or lack thereof, frankly, right? You know, it just boggles the mind. You know, now when this happened, I think it was in New Zealand, or unfortunately a while back, their prime minister said, "That's it, done. We're changing the laws." Here, I get the whole, you know, NRA, and I get the money, and I get that, you know. But I mean, when is enough going to be enough of this, man?
Yeah, it's a significant challenge, and recognizing the power and influence that the NRA has, you know, you can see why we are in the position that we're in as a nation. There's this joke about civil libertarians because, you know, we say that the Bill of Rights is our client, so the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, but that if you ask a civil libertarian how do civil libertarians count, you'll say 1, 3, 4, 5, because it's skipped the second amendment. It's a corny joke. It's a dad joke.
Yeah, but when you think about it,
you don't ever really see us out there on the Second Amendment.
Yeah. It took me a second to get you. I was like, what happened to 2? But then I was like, oh, I know what happened to 2. Hey, listen, man, we're out of time. I really want to thank you for coming by. I think this has been a real riveting conversation about, you know, what it is that the ACLU stands for, you know, and basically taking care of the rights that people should have, you know, and not being abused. So, my brother, thank you so much for coming on.
Appreciate you.
Really appreciate it. All right, folks, that's it for today. We're out of time. We're out of here. We'll be back again next week. And so until then, please do take care.